Are you looking for a fun quilt project? Are you wanting to use up your scraps? Do you have remnants of a project and you don't know what to do with them? In this quilting tutorial, we are taking the potato chip block and we're supersizing it. And I have a lot of tips and tricks for making it fast and easy. Plus, there's a free download at the end for 5 different quilt sizes. So stick with me and I'll show you how to do it. Hi there, I'm Karen Brown of Just Get It Done Quilts. I give you tips, tricks, and strategies to help you make the quilt that you want to make. And if you like what you see, please click that subscribe button. This video is number 12 in my Stashbuster series. These are fast and easy quilts designed to use up the fabric you already have. And today's pattern can also take advantage of your remnants and scraps. You might have already heard of the potato chip block. It uses one size piece cut at 2.5 inches by 4.5 inches, and it finishes at 2 by 4, which means that it's twice as wide as it is tall. To make the potato chip block, you start by sewing 2 pieces together like this. Then you add 1 to each of the sides. Then you add a pair to the top and the bottom. Then you add a pair to the sides, and then you add 3 to the top and the bottom. You need 18 pieces or chips to make one block, which finishes at 12 inches square. So you can see that it's a great way to use up your scraps. Today we're going to be making a variation of this idea by supersizing the block and making a cuddle quilt. If you prefer, you can also use today's method to make a twin, queen, king, or baby quilt. And I have a method that will make it fast and easy. So let's start with the chip. This chip is a great size to trim to when you're working with your scraps. Not only can you make them out of all sorts of orphan pre-cuts, it's also great for those odd-sized pieces of scrap. From a charm square, you can cut 2. From a layer cake, you can cut 8. From a fat quarter strip, you can cut 4. If you cut the whole thing, you can cut 28. From a jelly roll strip, you can cut 8 and occasionally 9. And with a 2.5 inch ruler, you can make fast work of odd-shaped fabric scraps. You will find the total number of chips that you need for your quilt in the pattern above the table right here. Now, normally you would sew them together like this on the short side. This method is great for leftover jelly roll strips, binding strips, and smaller scraps. However, in this project, we need long strips of chips. And you can imagine how protracted and tedious it can be making these long strips, one chip at a time. Luckily, there's another faster way. Not only can you cut the potato chip so that it finishes at 2 by 4, you can also cut it so that it finishes 4 by 2, which means we can use strips of fabric 4.5 inches tall and sew them together in a tall fabric set. And then from this, we can cut 2.5 inch strips lengthwise. Now, if you choose to use this method, you can make 16 sets from a width of fabric strip, 8 from a fat quarter strip, and 4 from a layer cake strip. Now, you might be asking, how many fabric strips do you need? In the pattern above the table is how many 4.5 inch by width of fabric strips you need. For the cuddle quilt, it's 22. So I have this pile of remnants from a half-yard bundle of fabrics that I purchased over 3 years ago. It's crazy, but I've already made 3 quilts from this fabric. But you can see I still have a ton of leftovers. So the other night, I took all the scraps out and sorted them into categories. All the large pieces are in this pile. From these large pieces, fabrics were chosen of similar length. These are all width of fabric. Then they were arranged in an order that mixed up the pattern and colors. Don't hesitate to swap out any fabrics that stand out too much or too little. The next step is to trim them to 4.5 inches. I also chose to cut them in half so that they're easier to work with. Then they are paired up and sewn together. It's up to you to decide on how long your strip set will be. This one is going to be 12. To keep your seams straight, be sure to set the seams and press every pair. Then the pairs are sewn together. Then these are sewn together. Take the strip set and align the seams with the markings on your cutting mat. If your strip set is too long for your mat, just fold it over, ensuring that the fold aligns with the lines on your mat. Now, if you can't remember the last time you changed your rotary blade, do it now. Cut long strips at 2.5 inches wide. Use a weight on the end of your ruler if necessary to keep it steady. As I said before, it's your choice how many fabrics you want in your strip set. And you don't need to have all strip sets the same. My set of darks is only 3 strips, and I have this other one of 5. Another advantage with this method is we are cutting with the straight of grain, which means our strips are less stretchy. When they're cut along the cross grain, the extra give gives more room for distortion. When I was processing these fabrics, I found many 2.5-inch strips and pieces. Now from these, I am going to make myself a stack of chips from these scraps, so I will be using a combination of method number 1 and method number 2. For each of the different sizes of quilt, you need to start with a different size center block so that you get the proper final proportions that you want. In the pattern handout, you'll find out how many you need in the diagram to the right. For the cuddle quilt, I need a stack of 8. Now, back when I was sorting my fabrics, I also had a pile of 2.5-inch strips. Some of them were with the fabric, some of them were fat quarter width, and some of them were just lone pieces. So I took my 8 chips I needed for the center from these pieces, and I just sewed them together. For the twin, you need to start with a 14 chip stack. The queen has a 6-piece stack, and the baby has a 4-piece stack. However, note that for the king size, you will also need an 8-piece stack, but they will be oriented on the horizontal. The assembly of this quilt is very straightforward, and we are starting with the side pieces. The table will show you how many blocks you need for the first row, but you can also figure it out by just laying down a strip beside the row. For the cuddle quilt size, we need 4, and this is the only row where we need to worry about nesting our seams. Sew to the left side of the center block, and sew to the right side of the center block. Using a really good ironing technique, press your seam. Now we need 2 blocks for the top and 2 for the bottom. Sew and press. From here on, it's just a courthouse step way of assembly. 2 rows to the sides and 1 to the top and bottom. From your long chip strips, you'll take off a chip here or add a couple there to find an arrangement that you like. And you repeat until you have the size dimensions that you want. However, there are 4 tips that you need to know before you go on. Don't hesitate to incorporate leftover chips. If you're like me and you don't like when 2 fabrics of the same type touch, you can pull these chips out of your scraps and just use them as spacers. Now from the second row forward, you don't need to worry about nesting any of your seams, as all blocks are staggered. But it's still important that the strips are centered. So here is a tip. On all rows that have an odd number of chips, mark the center of the strip before you sew. If your strip has even number of blocks, the center will just be the seam. Then, as you add each pair of strips, you want those centers aligned. Not just with the previous row, you want to be sure that it lines with the center block. Occasionally, despite our best efforts, things get misaligned. Just draw out that line from the center to match on the next row and get back on track. Another spot that can throw your quilt out of square is in the corners. for a couple of reasons. You might just have extra fabric because your 1/4 inch seam is not as accurate as it should be. Just trim it off. Nobody will ever notice that that block is a little bit smaller. Another corner issue is that your seams are not straight. We have a tendency to curve in at the start and at the end of a long seam. This makes the corner bigger with extra fabric so that the row will no longer lie flat. And this compounds with every row. So pay extra attention here to keep your seam straight and at a 1/4 inch. And check that the corners are square often. Now, you can only sew one seam at a time here. There is no chain piecing on this quilt. But if you're like me and you like to have your thread tethered at all times, have a stack of leaders or enders available to use in between rows. I found that I made one bonus block with each round of the strips. And it's amazing how many you can make with one quilt top. And that's all there is to it. Talk about an easy quilt. There's no nesting of seams, all the blocks are the same size, and you just continue from row to row to the very end. Now there are a couple of places that you can change the layout a bit. In the center, instead of using a stack of chips, you could use one big piece of fabric or several. It's an excellent place to put a fussy cut block if that's your style. Or sub in an hourglass block or something similar. For the rows, you might have noticed that I used a dark strip set along with my mid-value set. I realized as I was making the quilt, I could use these dark rows to add a little shape to the pattern. I did it with dark chips for rows number 1, 6, and 11. I'm sure there's many other ways that you can play with the layout. If you can think of another way, please share it with everyone down in the comments. I really enjoyed making this quilt. From one of my favorite blocks, the potato chip block, to using some of my favorite colors, to just how fast and easy this whole quilt came together. And I can't wait to make another one. I hope you have as much fun as I did making this. For a copy of the free pattern, you can find the link in the notes or go to my website, justgetitdonequilts.com. Now, if you watched my last video about my textile tour 2024 or my video, Sewing at Sea, you know that traveling with quilty friends is so much fun. So mark your calendars. Next Friday, October 18th, is our YouTube Live Q&A about my cruise to Scandinavia next May with RGE Travels. I hope you enjoyed this Stashbuster quilt. It's a fast and easy way to use up your stash. And check out one of my other Stashbusters in this series here. Take care, and I'll see you next time.